everybody, it's Brian Goulet of the Goulet Pen Company and InkNouveau.com. Today I want to talk to you about Diamine Majestic Blue. It's a great color, very, very popular, deep, dark, rich blue. So I want to show you what it's all about on some of my favorite papers with a couple of my favorite pens. So there's Diamine Majestic Blue. This is an 80 milliliter bottle of it. They come in 30 ml bottles as well. I'm a retailer and I sell this ink, but I only carry the 80 milliliter bottles personally. But they do have them in 30 ml. So the opening of the 80 ml bottle is almost exactly 3/4 of an inch on the inside diameter. So if you're trying to fit your pen in there, that'll give you an idea as to how big that is. It's probably in the average. I wouldn't say big or small necessarily. The two pens that I like to use for my review, one of them is a Pelikan M800 Italic. The other one is a Pelikan Pelicano fine nib. So I kind of go the large and small end of the spectrum. I use 3 different papers when testing my reviews. The first one I use is a Quavadis Habana. This is a 90-gram paper made by Clairefontaine. Very, very smooth, bright white paper, has an 8 millimeter ruling. So the Majestic Blue shows up very dark. Normally my Italic pen shows a lot of shading, and it draws the shading out. That's the variation between the light and the dark in the ink, and normally it shows the best shading scenario for every ink. But Diamine Majestic Blue is so saturated and so dark that you get very little shading. And I did it in my fine pen as well. You get a little bit of shading in the fine as well, but overall it's a very, very consistent color, dark, deep, saturated color. Now the neat thing about this, and I don't think this is going to show up on the video, so I'll talk about it, but there is this kind of red sheen, this red kind of overtone to the whole ink. It's got that deep blue but then a red sheen to it. That's a really unique feature of Diamine Majestic Blue. So really neat, very beautiful color. And then as far as the performance went on the back of the paper, normally when you have really saturated dark colors, they want to bleed through and they want to show through on the back side, but this one performed very well. So that's a testament to the paper as much as the ink. The next paper that I tried it on was the Rhodia Web Notebook. Now the Web Notebook, usually this off-white paper usually shows a little less shading than the white paper. And that's the case this time. What little shading there was in the Habana now is pretty much gone in the Webby, but still a really nice color. I really like how it looks on this off-white, deep, rich color. It jumps off the page, but it's not so offensive to the eyes when you're reading it back, but it is very, very bold. This is 90-gram paper as well. The one thing to note about this ink, because it's so saturated, is there's not a lot of variation in the color between a really wide nib and a drier writing really thin nib. So this ink is going to look fairly consistent in color no matter what kind of pen you use. And then there's the back of it. This is 90-gram paper, and so it shows a little bit darker than it did on the Habana, but still no bleed through, still performed really well. The next paper that I used it on was my Moleskine ruled notebook, very similar in size to the Web Notebook, and has that off-white paper, but the paper is thinner. It's 72 gram, and there was definitely some feathering going on. The Moleskine paper is not known to be the most consistent paper out there, but it is kind of representative of what most non-fountain pen paper is like. So I like to do these tests with it. But you can see there's all kinds of strands and striations of feathering going on with this ink. And you know, the dry time is a little bit faster on this ink, but in general the dry time is really long because there's so much saturation with this ink. And then there's the back of the page. So I actually did get some pretty heinous bleed through on the back of this one. So I definitely would not recommend this ink on thinner, cheaper paper. So that, because you're not going to get the best of what this ink has to offer. And then the last thing that I did was I used Rhodia 80-gram paper. This is from a Rhodia dot pad. The color was very consistent with the Habana because it's bright white, and the test that I did here was a water test, and this ink is really not very water resistant at all. Again, that's partly because the paper that I used repels ink, and the ink that I used was highly saturated. So it's going to take a really long time for this ink to dry. So if you're journaling and things like that, you want to make sure this ink is really dry before you go and turn the page, and if you smear it with your fingers and stuff, and then definitely try and keep it away from any water. Last thing I want to do for you here was show you the comparison. Now, Majestic Blue is a very unique color. Really not a whole lot that's close to it. The one thing that is kind of close is Private Reserve Electric DC Blue. It's the only other ink that I've found that has, it's a dark blue ink that has kind of that red sheen to it, the same as Majestic Blue does. So the two are very close. Other than that, there's really not another really identical comparison to Majestic Blue. So I hope you enjoyed my review of Diamine Majestic Blue. It's a very popular color, one of the most popular Diamine colors out there. It's, you know, like I've said, it's very saturated, and it will take a long time to dry. I've had on certain papers like Clairefontaine Triomphe, which is very ink repellent, very super smooth paper. I've had letters that I've sent to people where a couple of days later they get it and it will still smear if they rub it with their finger. That's how saturated this ink is. Granted, it was a very humid time of year, so that can have an effect too. If you're using, you know, a paper and it's a very humid environment, it can take longer for the ink to dry. But in general, this ink is kind of on the far end, the extreme end of the spectrum in terms of saturation. But still, you know, if you like really saturated inks, you know, this one is a winner for sure. Very dark, deep, rich blue. Really great color, and I love it myself. So anyway, if you enjoy it, then I highly suggest that you pick yourself up some Diamine Majestic Blue. And let me know how you liked my review. Email me at brian@gouletpens.com. And if you have any questions or suggestions, I'd be happy to hear from you. Thanks for sticking with me on the review, and right on.